Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our winter semester. We're going to start today the book of Deuteronomy. It's the 14th chapter, and we're going to be starting from the 3rd verse. You're not going to need text in front of you today, but just so that you know what we're going to be studying this semester. A few quick announcements before we begin. First, again, if any of you have your cell phones with you, please put it on the silent mode, the vibrate mode, but not the ringing. The exception we make is if the ring is to the tune of Am Yisrael Chai, we allow it. Other than that, we're going to ask you to please silence your cell phones. There are some upcoming lectures that I want to announce. You have a flyer in front of you. Those listening on Zoom, first of all, welcome. Those listening on Facebook, welcome. And those on YouTube, welcome. This Monday night, January 20th, we have a very special lecture for you. The Age of the Universe, 6 days or 14 billion years. How do you reconcile the biblical account of creation, which takes place over a 6-day period, versus the scientific theory of evolution of billions of years? We have a young scientist that's going to be visiting us from Ithaca, New York. His name is Joshua Krish. He's been published in many newspapers and science articles on the subject, and he shows us how we can accept both a scientific theory and a biblical theory, and they don't contradict one another, but they work hand in hand with one another. So if this interests you, if you want to know how you can uphold the traditional 6th day of creation without sacrificing the integrity of current scientific research, we invite you this Monday evening for an intellectual evening with scientist Joshua Krish. It's 8 o'clock this Monday night. It will not be on Zoom, so it's in person only. Do make reservations in advance at jewishacademy.com. If you look at this flyer and you flip it to the other side, the following 3 Mondays, there's a 3-part lecture series called With Honor and Dignity, The Jewish Approach to Death, Burial, and Mourning. Our 3 rabbis, Rabbi Sapachinsky will be speaking on January 27th, Rabbi Bistritsky on February 3rd, and Rabbi Levine on February 10th. It's a 3-part series, 8 p.m. Monday evenings. Again, you do need to register in advance at jewishacademy.com, and we look forward to having you for that series as well. Today's class is sponsored wow. My brain just went total blank on names. That does happen at this age. It'll come to me. Let's get started on the portion of Deuteronomy. The portion of Re'eh. Moses reviews with the Jewish people the laws of Kosher. Now, when we have text in front of us, we're going to study inside the text of Moses concerning what animal is considered kosher, which animal is not considered kosher. But first we have to ask the question, what is kosher? What is it? Sorry, I just remembered. It's Jeff and Lori Goldchin that texted me that they're sponsoring. I knew someone texted me and it escaped me. It just came to me. I want to thank Jeff and Lori Goldchin, who sponsor every week. They're sponsoring in honor of the first class of the winter semester. Thank you, Jeff and Lori, and thank you, God, for giving me back my brain. I was getting worried there. There were some doctors in the room, and I was going to say, I need to see you afterwards. Something's wrong. Food is central to life. For whatever reason, I haven't quite figured it all out yet, maybe some of you have an idea, God created the human being with the need to eat in order to survive. He could have opted to create a human being that would be self-sufficient. He created the human body, he designed it. He could have created a human body that survived, self-sufficient, without there being a need for food. Angels don't need food. After 120 years, when we leave this world and we enter into a heavenly world, I don't think there are pizza stores in heaven. I don't think we're going to need food, which means our existence will be self-sufficient. But when he designed the human being, he designed it in a way that it will constantly need. It needs food to live. Somehow, food needs to enter the system in order for us to be able to go on. And if we go a length of period of time without that, we don't survive as a human being. We don't make it. The need to eat is perhaps the most primal, basic, and recurring of all human needs. You think about it. Aside for the time that you're actually sitting and eating, I'll give you an example. We're at class right now. Some of you have a cup of coffee or tea in front of you. But majority, I don't see anyone eating right now. But yet at the very same moment, just a few hundred feet away, there's a store called Pizza Nash. They're working on our lunch that we're going to have here in this room for those that come in person. Sorry, Zoomers. So right now, as we speak, someone's mixing the dough and doing the twirls with making that pizza pie so that you're going to have pizza soon. And how did that get to the store? How did the flour get there? How did the dough get there? How did the tomato sauce get there? How did the cheese get there? Someone delivered it to them prior. And that cheese was made even earlier than that. And the tomato sauce was canned even earlier than that. Which means our lunch has already been in the works for some time by various different people all over the country. And at some point, Hector's going to get into an automobile. He's going to drive the few hundred feet. He's going to pick up the pies of pizza. And he's going to put it on the back table for all of us to benefit. So food, the involvement of food is not just the time that you're eating it. There's preparation that goes into it. There's shopping that goes into it. There's peeling the potatoes that go into it. And then, of course, there is money to pay for it. So how do you get the money to pay for it? Well, you go to work. All of it is food related. So this need to eat doesn't just affect us breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It affects just about every single part of our lives. And again, part of the master plan of God in designing and creating the human being and the world was this built-in need for food, and therefore there will need to be commerce, economy, people in the shipping business, automobiles to deliver things, people to plant the tomatoes, cows to give forth milk to make cheese. Also that you should have pizza today for lunch. It's all about you and all about the pizza. Now, I can throw out the question to you, why do you think God designed the human being this way? And if I was to ask you, if you were God, why would you have created it this way? And you would each come up with some possible answer as to why that is. Why would you have designed it that way? And not if you have the option of self-sufficient. You could have gotten rid of so many headaches for us if you just made the body self-sufficient. We can say that God wanted us to enjoy life and there's an enjoyment in eating. We can go that route. We can go the route that God wanted us to always need, so the human being knows it needs something above it, so that there's a connection to God, that we always need, bless the blessings of God. We need it to rain in order for there to be wheat. We can go that whole route. We can go a more Kabbalistic, Hasidic route, and that is that everything in this world is meant to be elevated, and there's different levels of creation, and the food level feeds the human level, and the human level feeds the spiritual level. Everything feeds an upper level, and that's the whole part of the system of creation, that ultimately it all comes around in a circle in which we all serve something higher than us. All of these are possibilities. Now, for the animal world, it's far more all-consuming than for us. For the animal world, all of its existence is about finding its next meal. Everything it does is about where is it getting its next meal from. any of these programs about watching the animals in the wild, it's all about strategic positioning of how they're going to get their next meal. That's everything about them. The human being, however, has that animal aspect to it, that we always are wondering about what's for lunch and what's for dinner and what's for breakfast. But at the same time, we also have a human soul, a godly soul. We also have free choice, and we have an intellect that allows us to see the world that it's not just only about food. That there's other things in life other than just food. Intellectual stimulation for a human being is extremely important. The idea to study, to want to learn, to want to grasp things that are intellectual. That gives us joy as well. That's something that we as a human being have. That we enjoy nature, that we enjoy seeing sights, is something that's not food related, but it's something that we as a human being have. So we can point to other aspects of the human being that's not just food related, but a good part of our existence is about either earning a living so that there can be food, or the actual aspect of eating or preparing the food. Now, we can spend the entire time talking about this idea that God created the world with this type of built-in system. But that's not really the focus of today's class or of this semester's class. We're going to narrow the focus a little bit to speak specifically within this food category about kosher food. Most people don't give much thought to what it is they're eating, so long as it tastes good and it's appetizing to the palate. The majority of people, they see something they like, they will get it, they will buy it, they will eat it. There's not this whole process of having to think, yes, no, yes, no. Think about it. The job of those in marketing, specifically marketing food items, whether it's restaurants, whether it's a product, whether it's a beverage, is to convince you that you're hungry or thirsty, and if you eat their cupcake, it'll take care of all your problems in life. That's what they sit down to say. How do I convince you to eat this cupcake, whatever that product may be? And they do a magnificent job. They get paid very well. Either they come up with the jingles that you end up singing for the next 20 years, or they paint the product in such a way that you can't help but want it, and they're very good at it. The billions and billions of dollars that are spent just by pick one part of it, the beer industry, to convince you that that's the beer that you should drink. You watch a Super Bowl, there's billions being spent just on beer products to convince you when you're thirsty, this is what you have to drink. Coca-Cola and Pepsi, I mean, that war has been going on. Those involved in the marketing do a magnificent job, because I only said Coke and Pepsi. All the other colas I didn't mention. Why? They didn't spend enough money to convince me that they're one of them. Dr. Pepper is close. How many of you remember this? Hold the pickles, hold the lettuce. Anybody in the room? Yeah. Special orders don't upset us. I've never walked into a Burger King in my life, but that song I knew. You couldn't watch I Dream of Jeannie without 100 times. Hold the pickles, hold the lettuce, special orders don't upset us. All we ask is that you let us serve it your way, or something like that, right? Look, I'm over 60 years old. I'm still singing a Burger King jingle. What about the voice of the Colonel from Kentucky Fried Chicken, right? We grew up with that voice. Never met the guy, but his voice had an impact. Marketing of the food products. Think about what goes into that. Almond Joys has nuts, Mounds don't. Anyone? Right? They get us. Not directly necessarily, but indirectly, by over and over putting this in front of us. And they convince us, you're hungry, eat me. Go buy me. And we do. Now, what changes for many people as we get older, we visit a doctor, we have a a physical and the guy says, you know, you got to start watching what you eat. That's somewhere at the 40, 50-year-old age. That's when we start getting the lectures from the doctors. You got to watch this. This level is high. This level is high. This intake is high. But up until then, we don't really think much. If we think it tastes good and it looks good, we eat it. It's different for an observant Jew. The kosher dietary laws force you to stop and think before you put anything in your mouth. There has to be a stop, a pause, before you take anything. Even if the commercial is telling you that you have to, you stop. And what's the question? Is it kosher? There's this automatic pause before you put anything in your mouth. Is it kosher? From a very early age, children are taught these words. Is it kosher? And they know that it means, if they hear the answer is no, that all the kvetching in the world will not get them that candy. It's this very interesting phenomenon. You take your little kindalach, you take them to the supermarket. You put them in the seat in the cart and you're going down the aisles. The kid sees a candy. The kid wants the candy. The kid starts saying, I want that. The mommy says, no, it's not healthy. That doesn't help nothing. You're going to have cavities. That doesn't help nothing. You can't eat it because it's not good for you. It doesn't do a thing. Or you can't have it until after dinner because of your appetite. Doesn't do a thing. What happens is what we call the siren. You know what the siren is? The siren is when your kid starts sounding like a siren in the supermarket that embarrasses you to the point that you say, okay, you can have it. Any of you have ever taken your little children to the supermarket, you know the siren. The kid has figured it out. They know if they scream loud enough, you get so uncomfortable with all the other people turning around to thinking that you're abusing your child. You don't want people to think that way, so you give in. The one exception is you say it's not kosher, and the siren doesn't go off. Because it's built in for them to know if it's not kosher, it's not going to happen. Anything else will happen. So there is this pause, even as a child, there is this pause that takes place before we consume anything, before we put anything into our mouth. And there's perhaps nothing about Judaism or about Jewish practice that's more misunderstood than the meaning of kosher. So although we think we understand it, does it have the certification or not, it's kosher or not, the truth is that kosher is perhaps one of the most misunderstood mitzvos of Judaism. While just about every human being in the face of the planet has heard that word kosher, few are familiar with what it really means, how it's kept, and why it's kept. Kosher is not about bagels and lox. It's not about matzo balls. It's not even about gefilte fish. You can have food in just about every ethnicity and either have it be kosher or not kosher. Today there are kosher Chinese restaurants, there are kosher Mexican restaurants, Italian restaurants, French restaurants, Japanese restaurants, you name it, you can have it. Either kosher or non-kosher. A few years ago, one of my sons got married to a girl from Cape Town, South Africa. And the wedding was in Cape Town. That's a long schlep. So I booked all my children and grandchildren flights to Cape Town for the wedding. Long journey there, even longer coming back. Long trip. Now, on international flights these days, airlines still offer meals and still offer kosher meals. It used to be, if you remember, even a flight from here to the East Coast, they would offer breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and you can order in advance kosher. But now they don't do it inside the United States. But if you're going international, as long as you order in advance, you can still order your kosher meals. Of course, I'm pretty organized with these flights. I ordered all the seats. I did everything right. I made sure to book kosher meals for both ways. As we're on the flight, on the return flight, and again, it's about a 24-hour flight. It goes on forever. The flight attendant made their way to me, recognizing that I was the leader of the group, and said, "It seems to have been a problem. We didn't bring the kosher meals on board." Now, I got a lot of kids and a lot of grandchildren. There's about 20 of us in the group. And I got to figure out, what are we going to do about food for the next day? Now, luckily, I travel with a lot of nash. Not the healthiest of foods, but just in case it was needed. So clearly, nash was going to be breakfast. That's a lot of sugary stuff. So we have to start figuring out, okay, what's going to be for breakfast, what's going to be for lunch, what's going to be for dinner. I don't want to get too much off into a tangent over here, but I told the flight attendant, all I need from you is to get me whole fruit. Just get me whole fruit. And she said, no, the only whole fruit we have on the flight is reserved for first-class passengers. So I said, but I think an exception could be made under the circumstances that you forgot to get kosher food on the flight, and I got all these little kids. You can get me some apples and oranges. And she said, no, I can't do that. Yes, they did get a letter from me afterwards about that. That rather upset me. I won't say the name of the airline, but I will tell you afterwards. So one of the flight attendants, and it became the talk amongst the flight attendants, we have a problem, we have 20 people, there's no food to give them. So she comes over to me rather innocently, and she says this, look, before we put the other meals in the heater, why don't I bring it to you? You could do the blessing on them and make them kosher, and then we'll heat them up for you. And I was trying to say, where is she coming from? And she said, I always hear the word kosher certification, that a rabbi makes it kosher. And so, why don't you make it kosher here on the flight? And you think about, from her perspective of not really understanding this kosher, but just always hearing it has to have a signature of a rabbi. So here, sign it, and then we'll heat it up. And it came clear to my mind of how ignorant most of the world is about what kosher means and what kosher doesn't mean. We can't make something kosher or make it not kosher. We can certify if it is kosher, or we can certify that it's not kosher. Kosher doesn't mean that it came from Israel either. Kosher doesn't mean that it has Hebrew letters on it. There's a lot of stuff that come from Israel with Hebrew letters that are not kosher. But automatically your thought is, if it's got Hebrew-looking letters, it has to be kosher. I tell you, it's harder to keep kosher in Israel than it is in New York. Absolutely. Absolutely. There are so more kosher establishments in Brooklyn than there are in many of the cities in Israel. Jerusalem maybe, yes, but you go outside of Jerusalem and it's not easy finding kosher products. Surprising. You have to know what you're looking for. You have to know what certifications, because you're used to just seeing Hebrew letters and that means it's kosher. You got to be more vigilant than that. Some people think that kosher is some antiquated custom observed by just a handful of Orthodox Jews. It's something old. The truth of the matter is that the number of people who keep some level of kosher today is close to 10 million. That's a big number. That's not a small number. I'm not talking about glatt kosher, but in some level that kosher is kept is 10 million Jews today. In addition to Jews, there's a growing number of non-Jewish consumers who choose kosher products. And they choose it for various reasons. Some are concerns about food quality. Some are concerns about animal welfare. Some about food safety. Kosher certification has expanded beyond Jewish consumers to appeal to health conscience or some ethically motivated reasons. Some estimate that around 20 to 25% of American consumers purchase kosher certified products regularly, that they're looking for that kosher certification. The recent estimate of the kosher food industry is that it is a $20 billion annual amount of what's being spent on kosher in the world today. And it's rising at approximately 13% a year. A $20 billion industry is not about a few small group of Jews. It's huge. It's very big. So what I would like to do is explain it to you so that you have a better understanding of what it's about. And then we'll see it in the future in the text of when Moses introduces it to the Jewish people. I still haven't told you what kosher is. What does it mean and why? Kosher is the diet plan for the soul. It's a spiritual diet for a physical body. These are the foods that God prescribed in the Torah that can be consumed by the Jewish people. What does the word kosher mean? The biblical word kosher means fit, appropriate. That's what it means. The word is used for things other than food. You may ask us once in a while to check your mezuzah on your door. And we'll give it to a scribe, and the scribe will look it over and say, it's kosher. It's not kosher. It means it's fit. It's good. That's what the word kosher means. Sometimes you could be reading from a Torah scroll inside the synagogue. The person reading it sees something about a letter or a word that doesn't look so good. He'll have a scribe take a look at it, and the scribe will say it's kosher or it's not kosher. If you've ever seen a Torah scroll inside an ark that its belt is tied outside the cover, that means that something has been found not kosher about one of the letters, one of the words in the Torah, and that cannot be used until it's fixed, until it becomes kosher again. So that word kosher is used quite often. The world uses it as well. That's kosher, that's not kosher, having nothing to do with food. Because the word itself does not mean anything to do with food. It means appropriate. It's fit. It's good to work, to use. But more than anything else, kosher has become synonymous with talking about food. Is the food fit for a Jew to eat or not fit for a Jew to eat? What's the Hebrew word, by the way, for non-kosher?
Treif.
Treif. Anyone ever hear that word treif?
Yeah.
Where does that word treif come from? Anyone know where it comes from?
Dirt, trash.
It actually does not mean non-kosher, just so that you have the background. It comes from a verse in the Torah itself, in the laws that Moses will teach about kosher, but he calls it treifa. But treifa does not mean a non-kosher animal. In fact, treifa means it was a kosher animal. In fact, it was slaughtered properly, all done right. But you can't eat it. Do you know why? Because when they opened the body of the animal, they found a disease in the animal, an illness in the animal, an illness so severe that this animal would have died from that illness. They found a brain tumor. They found something on the heart. That animal is called treifa. You cannot eat it. Not fit. If the animal was kosher, the slaughtering was kosher, that wasn't the problem. The problem was simply that the animal wasn't healthy. If the animal wasn't healthy, God says, I don't want you eating it. We've used that word treif to talk about all non-kosher food, but the actual meaning of the word treif had nothing to do with food that wasn't originally non-kosher. It is non-kosher only because of circumstances. I just felt you should know that. The Torah teaches us that these are the foods that are to be consumed by a Jew. All fruits and vegetables are kosher, but need to be insect-free. So you got to make sure it doesn't have insects in it. Got to clean it well if it's like broccoli or raspberries or blueberries, things that attract the insects. You wash it well, but all fruits and vegetables are kosher. I'm not going to get into the laws of the 7th year Shemitah, all of that. That's a whole separate category, but the food is kosher. Any land animal that has split hooves and chews its cud, 2 signs that Moses will give. It has to have both. It chews its cud, it regurgitates its food, and if you look at its feet, its hooves are split. Then you know the animal is kosher. If it only has 1 sign, it's not kosher. Needs both. And at some point in this semester, we're going to talk about this idea of if it only has 1 sign, but just something to talk about. When it comes to birds, fowl, the Torah will list by name 24 birds that are kosher. The rest are not. Fish must have 2 signs, fins and scales. If it has fins and scales, it's kosher. If it does not have both of those signs, it's not. All land animals and birds must be killed through what we call shechita. Shechita is a traditional ritual slaughter. If the animal dies by any other means, it's not kosher. The animal itself was a kosher animal, but its meat is not fit to be eaten by us because it was not slaughtered by shechita. And again, all of these we're going to talk about in greater detail. Even an animal that's kosher, slaughtered properly and healthy, the sciatic nerve cannot be kosher. The part of the animal that touches the meat, that touches the sciatic nerve, cannot be koshered. And that has to do with, in the book of Genesis, with Jacob having a wrestling match with an angel, and the angel dislocates his thigh, injures his sciatic nerve. At that point it says, from this point forward, no Jew shall eat the sciatic nerve of an animal. So there's a certain cut of meat that we don't eat because we can't take out the nerve. There are some places in Israel that know exactly how you remove the nerve of this particular cut, and they claim that therefore the meat is kosher. There are some rabbis that go along with it. Most would say we just stay away from that particular cut. It's the tenderloin. So tenderloin steak is very difficult to find as glatt kosher because of the removing of this particular nerve. Blood from an animal, slaughtered properly. Kosher animal, slaughtered properly, but it's the blood, not kosher. So you have to, your grandmothers knew this by the way, you have to salt the meat before it's being eaten, even if it's kosher, to remove its blood. Salt has the power to withdraw the blood from the meat. Every one of our bubbies knew how to salt the meat because they would buy it from the butcher with the blood. They would bring it home and they would do the salting themselves. Today, every kosher butcher already sells it to you, already salted, there's no blood in it. That has changed.
It doesn't have to be soaked as well?
Soaked, there's a whole process, yes. There's a soaking process, a salting process. There's one exception, by the way. It's a Jewish staple, and that's liver. Chopped liver is very hard to make because the liver, which holds the blood, can't be salted to get the blood out. The only thing you can do with liver to get the blood out is what, again, your bubbies did. They put it in this little net over the flame and they roasted it. Roasting gets the blood out of the liver, and that's why liver was always roasted, and then they made chopped liver out of that. The reason why chopped liver is so expensive is because of the process that it takes to make is a very long process to make it to be kosher. Just some facts that you should know. Certain fats of the animal. Animal was kosher, slaughtered properly, blood was removed, all done right, not eating the sciatic nerve. But if it's just the fat, certain fats are not kosher as well, needs to be removed. Additionally, meat and milk, both kosher in their own right, can't be eaten together. Can't have meat and milk together. It can't be cooked together. You can't even have benefit from it being together. A lot of laws on that. What about eggs? So eggs or milk products of a kosher animal are kosher. Eggs and milk from a non-kosher animal are not kosher. There is one exception of a product that comes from an animal that is kosher. Anyone know what that is?
Honey.
Honey. Honey comes from a bee. A bee is not kosher, but honey is kosher. The reason is because it's the carrier of the honey. It's not really the creator of the honey. And that's why honey is that lone exception. Very good, Leah. Insects are not kosher. However, those that are insect lovers will know that there is one exception mentioned in the Torah. There's a particular grasshopper that if you can identify it, it is a kosher grasshopper. Very few have ever figured out which one it is, so we just stay away from all grasshoppers. But there is one grasshopper mentioned in the Torah that is a kosher grasshopper. It gives very specific signs about it. I haven't found anyone that has figured it out yet, nor have I found anyone that wants to figure it out.
What about bed with sleep?
What about what?
On bed with sleep.
Not kosher.
What was the question?
The locust from Egypt? No. A giraffe, by the way, is a kosher animal. We don't eat it. Do you know why?
You can slaughter it.
We can't figure out where to slaughter it. It's got too many complex questions as far as which part of the neck makes it a kosher slaughter. We haven't figured it out yet. So if anyone's interested, you'll have to wait for Moses to return and Moses to give us a workshop. But I just think let them live. Let them live. Cooked and processed foods now let's get into. So, when you're dealing with companies that mass produce these processed foods, what's the problem? The problem is even a trace ingredient of one item that came from something non-kosher messes everything up. So let's say you see there's 17 different ingredients. If but one of these ingredients is not kosher, then all of the thing that they've mixed together is not kosher. And so that's where this whole idea of kosher certification comes in. The kosher certification means that they get in touch with a company like the OU, the OK, there's so many today. They'll send a team down to this plant and they'll look into every single ingredient and the source of every ingredient and make sure every ingredient that goes into this product is indeed kosher. So when you're seeing a little OU symbol over there, there's a lot that goes into that for them to be able to certify that that product is indeed kosher. Because it's not just the peaches that come in the can, it's everything else that's in there that they have to certify indeed it was kosher. A problem, let's say, when you have something, a canned good that has so many ingredients in there, is the more ingredients, the more difficult that certification is going to be. But there's a lot that goes into that. Now, there is a misconception or a misunderstanding that the laws of kosher are associated with ancient Israelite health concerns. I'm sure all of you have heard that kosher has something to do with health concerns, healthy food. Therefore, I'll say, since contemporary health standards have solved these ancient health issues, and since in our country we have USDA oversight, the laws of kosher are no longer necessary. You hear that theory out there. Kosher was only important when they were in the wilderness. They didn't have a refrigerator. Or within this period of time, they didn't. Things weren't healthy. It's so far from the truth. It might be this easy cop-out. It might be the easy excuse as to why someone is not keeping kosher, so we can just say, that was just in the wilderness. But it's dishonest. I would rather someone say, I'm not ready to keep kosher, than to try saying, that was just because. Don't invent reasons that are simply not true. It's okay for us to say, I'm not ready for it. At some point, perhaps, hopefully I will be. But right now, I wasn't raised with it. I want to learn more about it. All of that is fine. But don't invent the cop-out excuse and say, that's just because, when there's not a basis of truth to it. Does the Torah want us to be healthy? Absolutely the Torah wants us to be healthy, but being healthy is not what kosher is all about. And here are the reasons I'll give you. Number one, The Torah nowhere in its discussions of kosher says any mention of any health claim. That would be the perfect place to put it. I want you to eat this because I want you to be healthy. It's not found anywhere. Health will not explain why an animal has to be slaughtered in a certain manner. Health will not explain why fins and scales are needed on a fish to be kosher. Health would not explain why milk from a non-kosher animal is not kosher. Health would not explain why one animal yes and one animal no. Mad cow disease affects cows which are kosher. There are many non-kosher animals that are healthy and yet they remain non-kosher. Rabbit meat is known to be very healthy, but it's not kosher. The false theory may have begun because of trichinosis from pigs. And that's where some of this theory came from, that pigs causes trichinosis, and because a pig isn't kosher, the pig became like the symbol of all non-kosher, right? Anytime you want to think you have the symbol of non-kosher, it's the pig. We blame it all on the pig. By the way, as we will find out, the pig has one of the two kosher signs. At least it's got 50% there. But we pick on that pig, the chazer treif. Any of you ever heard that word? Chazer treif, right? It's not just enough to say chazer, a pig. It's pig treif. So because there was this illness that came from the pig, trichinosis, people came up and said, that must be the theory of what kosher is all about. Well, how did the author know thousands of years ago that pig meat would cause trichinosis thousands of years before doctors discovered it? There are billions of Chinese people who eat pork as a staple of their diet, and they don't seem to be in any imminent threat of extinction. And finally, I've always maintained this, as one who knows, I know this well. Pringles and Mountain Dew are both kosher. They're not healthy. Yeah, I know. I was addicted to both of them. To have a double addiction of Pringles and Mountain Dew and to eat them together in mass amounts, not healthy. I've given up both of them. I have not had a Mountain Dew in now over 2 years. I feel like I'm at an AA meeting here. That's how addicted I was. I can't say the same that I haven't had a Pringle in 2 years, but very, very small amounts, but I have not touched a Mountain Dew in 2 years. It's very hard for me, very hard. But to say that it's health reasons, there's so much kosher junk food out there, and there's so much healthy food that's not kosher. It's, again, as like I say, it's an excuse, but it's not honest. There are herbs, there are plants that can cause serious illnesses and even death that are not prohibited because they are not kosher. They're plants, they're vegetation, so they're kosher. But they can kill you. Now, it could be prohibited under another law, the law that says you have to watch your bodies and take care of your health. But under the kosher laws, they're not prohibited. And finally, this is a theory of mine, a challenge of mine that I always pose to those that say that it's kosher. God calls all human beings on the face of the earth his children. He cares about all the families on the face of the earth. The reason why there is a chosen people, as I've maintained, is God says to Abraham, I want you to bring blessings to all the families on the face of the earth. So God cares about all the families on the face of the earth. If kosher was all about health, then why is it limited to Jews? You can say to me he doesn't care about the non-Jew? You can eat food that will kill you, but the Jew, no, you I got to protect. That doesn't sound like a father to me. If he has a specific mission for the Jewish people, for his firstborn, for whatever, I get that part. I've been explaining that for years now. But to say this is about health, so I only care what you guys eat, but I don't care what anyone else eats, that doesn't sound like a loving God to me. And as I mentioned, nowhere in the Torah when he introduces this to us does he say, it's because I need you to be healthy. If it is all about health, he would have said to all of mankind, don't eat this. And pre-Noah times, by the way, he didn't let any of us eat meat. Meat only came permissible to the human being post-flood. From Adam until Noah, God is able to say no to humanity about food. He's done that before. So if for whatever reason this species of food was not healthy, he would have announced it to the world and say, the world must keep kosher. Now, I don't think McDonald's would have liked it. I don't think Burger King would have liked it. I know a lot of the people in the industry wouldn't have liked it, but they would have gotten used to it. They would have come up with a kosher Big Mac. Not that hard to do with imitation cheese if you wanted a cheeseburger. Have there been health benefits to keeping a kosher diet? Perhaps as a byproduct. We are far more careful about the health of the animal. That might contribute to it as well. We are more careful about cleanliness in our slaughterhouses. That might have led to it. But Gentiles can accept these upon themselves without having to keep kosher. They could be concerned about the cleanliness of their slaughtering houses, and many have. They can up a notch on the health of their diets just simply by saying we want to be healthier people, having nothing to do with kosher. Kosher is a Jewish diet, and as I mentioned, it's a spiritual diet that the soul of the Jew needs. It's a spiritual commandment that takes on a physical form in the form of food. When the Torah speaks about these laws, it refers to a non-kosher animal, not with the word treif as we are used to it. It refers to it by the word tameh. You know what tameh means? Tameh means it's spiritually impure. Spiritually impure doesn't mean not healthy. It means for you, for the sensitivity of your soul, for the mission that I have given you, this is not fit. The whole subject of tumah tara, of purity, spiritual purity, and spiritual impurity, really is a spiritual thing. The idea, if I'm in a building with a dead body, I become spiritually impure. There's nothing physical about that. It's not that it's not healthy. People that work in funeral homes are doing the greatest service. People that do this, in the Jewish world, it's called the Chaver Kaddish. It's the greatest mitzvah in the world to take care of a dead body, to be involved in the burial, to go to a funeral. One of the biggest mitzvahs out there. Doesn't mean it's not healthy, but there's a sensitivity to your soul, the soul that's given in the body of life, in the separation of death. That means right now you're in a state of spiritual impurity, and as soon as a certain period of time goes by and the immersing in the mikveh, then you're back to being spiritually pure. It's not physical, it's spiritual. Kosher is spiritual, yet it takes on a physical form. And that's the first thing that we need to know about kosher. So we're dealing with something that God says, this has to do with your soul, with the sensitivities of your soul. I have created a very specific diet of certain animals that are fit for your soul to consume, and the rest are not fit for your soul to consume. It doesn't mean it's not healthy for anyone else. But for my chosen people that I have a very specific mission for, that I have given a very special soul in order to accomplish this mission, to bring blessings to all the families on the face of the earth, I'm going to need you to get the energy that will come from the DNA makeup of how I made up these specific animals and not those animals. I'll close with a story. And then we'll take some questions in the room, and we'll continue next week. David Stauber is an attorney in Los Angeles. He was raised in a religious home. At the time he went off to college in the 1960s, he had lost and dropped his interest in Judaism. Between his rebellious culture of the 60s and this general sense that he always had, his skepticism that he always had on Torah and Judaism, he just left it all behind. He got married, his wife Jackie. They decided, at least Jackie decided, she wants to keep a kosher home. That's the one thing she wants to do. Observant she's not, Orthodox she's not, but the one thing I'm going to want in this marriage is, in the home we keep kosher. David was familiar with kosher. He was raised in a kosher home, and if that's what you want, he was fine with that. Okay. After he graduated from law school, David and Jackie took a trip to Europe. And while touring in Greece, they were in a terrible car accident. Jackie's back was broken, and she became semi-paralyzed. When she was transferred to Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles, she was visited by a rabbi by the name of Shlomo Kunin. Rabbi Kunin you've all heard of. He was the Chabad rabbi in Westwood, he still is today, and he would visit quite often at Cedars-Sinai, and he comes into Jackie's room. He hears about the accident, he hears about her condition, and he encourages Jackie Stauber to write a letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Just write, start a correspondence, ask him for his blessings. She writes a letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and she gets an immediate answer from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And the correspondence continues, going back and forth with New York to Cedars-Sinai about her medical condition, about what care she should get, what she should do, what she shouldn't do. This goes back and forth. 6 months go by. She finishes her rehabilitation. She's still semi-paralyzed, but she very much wants to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe in person. The doctors say you're in no condition to get on a plane and fly to New York. And she insists that she's going to have to find a way to do it. And she does. This is 1973. She flies to New York. They have an appointment to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Jackie and David are waiting in the room right outside the Rebbe's room. That's where the appointments would wait. And someone walks up to him and says that the way the appointments work, for those of you familiar with a yechidus, a private audience with a Rebbe, is you would write on a piece of paper the things you want to discuss. What's on your mind? You would walk into the Rebbe's room, you would hand him your letter, the Rebbe would read it, and then the conversations would start. So the Rebbe wanted you to set the agenda. There are times the Rebbe went off the agenda on things on his mind, but the Rebbe wanted you to first start the agenda. So someone walks over to David, hands him a piece of paper and says, you should write your letter now. You're coming up, next 2 people away from going, this will be the time to write. And he says, I have nothing to ask. I'm not here for myself. I have no interest in this. I'm just escorting my wife. She wants to meet the Rebbe. I'll take her in, but I'm just going to be in the background. I'm just wallpaper. I'm not participating in this. So the fellow says to David Stauber, don't be silly. You're walking into a very holy room to meet a very holy person. Write your letter. So he takes the paper. And he writes this. If God is so great, why does he insist on all these tiny details? That's what always bothered him. If there is a God, and he's this big infinite God, why are you driving me crazy with such small details that a big God cares if a spoon that was used for chicken soup is now in cottage cheese? Oy vey! This infinite God is going to say, oy vey! So he phrased it, and that's all he wrote. And David is the one that told this story. If a God is so great, why does he insist on all these tiny details? That was his letter. They come into the Rebbe's room. Jackie hands the Rebbe her letter. David hands the Rebbe his letter. He first addressed Jackie. And they again have been corresponding for the last few months. And so they take off where their correspondence left off. The Rebbe is giving her encouragement, blessings, and then the Rebbe picks up David's letter. He reads it, and the Rebbe says, I don't understand your question. So Stauber thought the Rebbe didn't understand English well. But being that he was brought up in a home that spoke Yiddish, so he starts translating his own question into Yiddish for the benefit of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who perhaps didn't understand the English. So the Rebbe waves him off like, I didn't need you to translate it. I don't understand your question. It's not for God. It's for us. That's what he answered him. It's not for God. It's for us. God wants us to be close to him. And he gave us the pathway. If you want to know how to get close to me, This is how you do it. And then the Rebbe patiently explained to David that God wants the closeness of a relationship. He doesn't want to intimidate us. The commandments are not about frightening us. It's not about controlling us. It's about paving a path to God. You follow this path, you'll find me. You'll find meaning. You'll find purpose. You'll find joy. You just have to trust me. I'm giving you the pathway. For David Stauber at the time, this was a radical idea because he was raised in observant Judaism. But the Judaism that he has been exposed to was about God wants subservience. God wants control. It wasn't about love. It was that you have to conform to a conduct in order to avoid God's wrath and punishment. And here it's all being framed very, very differently. That because God loves us and He wants the closeness of a relationship, He gave us the avenue, the pathway of how to connect. And he says he walked out feeling that the darkness of his life had just turned light. That suddenly it all was clear to him. And thereafter, both David and Jackie began this extensive correspondence with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who always responded to their questions. Those of you from the Valley, you've seen their name, the Stauber family name, on many facilities, on many buildings, on many synagogues, many institutions that this family has built since. The doctors have told Jackie Stauber that she was never going to have children. The Staubers have 3 sons, they have 2 daughters, they have many grandchildren and many great-grandchildren today. But this idea that kosher, it's not about God dictating, and He doesn't want me to enjoy that, and He doesn't want me to enjoy, it's not about that. It's a spiritual diet for us, that God says to His chosen people, you follow this, and it's going to work. You just have to trust me on it.